Up next on Fantasia the Talk Show, we have Adam Egypt Mortimer with Daniel Isn't Real. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's exciting to be here.
I mean, this is a film that has already excited a lot of audiences across festivals. It's meta, it's doppelgangers, it's a thriller, it's psychedelic. Can you talk about the origin of this film?
Yeah, so it's based on a novel, and the novel's called In This Way I Was Saved, which is a cool literary title and a terrible name for a movie. I met the writer, so this project started 7.5 years ago. I think that's like pretty much the time from when I first said I want to make this movie to when we had the world premiere at South by Southwest. It was 7.5 years. I met the novelist at a party, and he had just moved to LA, and he was like, oh, I just wrote this novel, and he told me like one sentence about it, and I read it that weekend and called him on Monday and said, let's make this movie. This would be so cool to make into a movie. And we started working on it together. And after writing a first draft of it, I said, hey, I think I've really conned you, because there's no way we can make this crazy movie as the first film I ever make. But so then we wrote another movie, a very low budget movie called Some Kind of Hate, which played here at Fantasia years ago. And when it did, that really, it did exactly the thing it was supposed to be. It was like, here's this little movie and people like it. And then finally we were able to make Daniel. But interestingly, I think because we were sort of creating those two movies at the same time, they have a lot of interlinked themes about friendship and about taking things too far and about losing control of yourself because an evil entity is in control of you, these sort of problems that we all face.
I would love to know how you kind of mirror the story itself with this aesthetic, because it's so incredibly rich and beautiful and like psychedelic I use, but it's not even quite right, you know?
I call it kinetic maximalism.
Oh, I love that,
I was sort of describing what the style of the movie would be, and I made a very, very complex, like 40-page design document before we started shooting so that everybody involved, whether you're the camera operator or the production designer or even the actors, could know exactly what the design was. And yeah, I came up with this idea of kinetic maximalism in the one hand because part of the themes of the movie have to do with isolation and loneliness and things like that, but you have to be careful not to make a boring movie. And for me, it's important to reflect like an excitement and overwhelmingness of what it's like to be in the modern age, what it's like to go through a manic episode, like all of these things, like it had to be seductive, it had to be like get your pulse up. And I think there's been, for me, I wanted to reverse away from the trend in horror movies in particular, where it's sort of like things are very still, things are very gray and desaturated, and I wanted to see how frightening and tense and anxious can we be if we add more colors and more movement and more electronic music and still have it be terrifying. And I think in that sense I was after anxiety as the guiding emotion more than any other.
I mean, in a way, the movie, at least for me, feels like the horror of hyperconnectivity, where they're hyperly connected to yourself and your own emotions, but also every aspect of the world.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, one of the things I've noticed when I was talking to some other horror people recently about how difficult sometimes they feel it is to do horror in an era where everybody has a phone. But for me, that was part of the horror. You know, like it wasn't a movie where with a sort of traditional structure where, well, there's a guy alone and if only he could call somebody, he'd be saved. It was like the guy is never alone and the entity is always here with him, and there's scenes where he's looking at his phone and it only increases the horror. Yeah. He's getting text messages and it only makes, I mean, we've all had this experience of getting a text message that feels like horror in one way or the other, whether it's somebody's mad at you or whatever, like that feeling, being connected, like being involved with other people's emotions all the time.
And how it kind of alters our consciousness, because we don't even know as a species what that effect has on the way we think and the way we experience life. That's
so interesting. Yeah, I think it is something that's like rewiring our brains, for sure.
And I mean, you also deal a lot with doubles, obviously. Did any particular challenge present themselves in kind of approaching that and putting that on screen?
Well, the challenge was in the casting of the movie and finding two people who could pull this off. And Miles Robbins, who plays the protagonist Luke, I had him audition for both roles, and he actually wanted to play Daniel, but he was so perfect for playing Luke, and yet was also had a whole vision of how he would play Daniel, which, without revealing too much of what happens in the movie, this was something that was a very strong, very important for that character to play. So, you know, he sort of, I mean, in some ways, this is like a sort of a psychedelic horror version of Face Off, where you get two actors who get to, you know, like play off of each other and play as each other and sort of have these reverse roles. And I was also very obsessed with the movie Persona, Ingmar Bergman's movie Persona, which is about two women whose identities sort of merge, and we did as much as we could to rip off visuals from that film and, you know, put it in like a modern thriller context.
And like hyper colorized,
yes,
right?
Right, because that's a beautiful black and white movie, and we would steal their shots but make, you know, add all of these like deep reds and violets and pinks and things like that.
I think it looks spectacular. I mean, just on the visual experience, visual audio too, like the sound design is incredible.
Yeah, the sound design, my sound designer Owen did it, and the score by this guy Chris Clark, he's like a British electronic artist who goes just as Clark, and he was on the Warp label, and he had never done anything remotely like this before, but his music creates these worlds. You sort of see movies in your head when you listen to his music, and I talked to him and I said, like I was obsessed with, for the music, I was obsessed with Requiem for a Dream, and the way that movie is like the score starts and then it just keeps building and keeps going the entire movie, and the whole thing is like blended by sound. And I told Chris that it would be cool if we could make this, like, if we start with Bernard Herrmann, you know, like Hitchcock music, but then sort of dump that into like a industrial threshing machine and see where that, so it's like, it's looking to the past. It has this sort of classic vibe, but it's also very futuristic, which I think is what the character Daniel himself is like, because he's got this kind of historical backstory, but he's very modern at the same time.
Great. I'd like to thank you so much for being on our show. This is Adam Egypt Mortimer, director of Daniel Isn't Real. Be sure to subscribe to Fantasia the Talk Show and check out our other great videos. Thank you so much.
First of all, it's an honor to show it at Fantasia, because this was the first film festival I ever came to. With when my first movie was just a work in progress, we showed stuff of it here, and that really launched a lot of things for me, and is very responsible for why I was even able to make this movie. So it's felt quite lovely to triumphantly return to Montreal, and the crowd is great. First of all, I'm a big fan of cat meows, so hearing people meow at the beginning of the movie is extremely satisfying, and it was a really great crowd.